Hello, everybody! My name is Cole, and welcome to another episode of Aquarium Online Academy. Today, we're here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And behind the camera here, I have my friend Lourdes with us. So today, we're going to be talking about a really cool type of ocean habitat, and we're going to explore everything about it. Today, we're exploring tide pools. But before we get started, I wanted to make a quick reminder that we are actually able to take live questions here on Aquarium Online Academy. So if you go ahead and look below, you can see our text live questions to 562-286-1838. Again, that's 562-286-1838. Or you can also email us at live@lbaop.org. And if you're having to watching this at another time, which you can find all of our Aquarium Online Academies on YouTube, you can actually still email your questions. We want to hear your observations and your great scientist thoughts at live@lbaop.org at any time, and we'll try to get back to you on that. Sound good? All right. So why don't we go ahead and get started right now? So today our topic of the day is tide pools. So let's go ahead and start with some observations, because scientists like to do two things. They like to notice things, and they like to wonder about them. So let's go ahead and start off with that. I'm going to go ahead and step off screen for just a moment, and we're going to take some time and notice and wonder about this tide pool we're looking at right here. I'll give you some time to think. All right, scientists. So what are some things that you noticed and some questions that you have? So some of the things that I noticed was there's a lot of different types of animals. A lot of really special looking adaptations, which are special traits that help their animals live in their own homes. What did you notice? Ooh, I noticed a fish right there. Let's see. And then what's a question that you might have? Let's see. Ooh, what are those wiggly things? Interesting. So let's go ahead and take a look at that right there. So that's actually a sea anemone. And that's actually what Nemo lives in. So sea anemones are kind of like sea jellies, but they're kind of plopped onto a wall. But you can find them in a lot of really cool different habitats all around the world. Okay, so why don't we go ahead, and now that we have our scientist brains all warmed up, why don't we go ahead and move over to a picture of a tide pool so we can start to learn about these really cool places. Oh, that is awesome. Okay, so we're looking at a tide pool now. So pool is simply a place where the ocean overlaps with the land. You can almost kind of think of it like a lake on the beach. So notice some things together. I notice a lot of water. I see some waves. Ooh, I even see a little bit of green right here, right? So we're pretty close to like maybe a coastal habitat, right? I see some sand and a whole bunch of rocks. So I kind of wonder, does that mean that this environment changes throughout the day? Does the environment only go up to a certain amount of the land? Like, does the ocean overlap with those plants? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the things that kind of make a tide pool a special place. So, tides are influenced by the moon. So, the moon actually will pull water. Thank you. The moon will pull water using the force of gravity to various sides of the Earth as it rotates around the Earth. And that will kind of bulge the water to certain sides of the Earth. That will result in a low tide or a high tide, right? So why don't we go ahead and take a look to see what that influence looks like. I think we have a pretty cool video to show. Okay. Ooh, why don't we look at the time-lapse video? Hold on there for just a moment. We can kind of see some of these waves kind of crashing into this tide pool habitat. Okay. Yeah. So tide pools are always changing. So with the tides will change throughout the day. So sometimes you may go to the beach and you may notice, the water is a little bit higher than it was when I came yesterday. That's because tides are always changing. A high tide will happen every 6 hours, and a low tide will happen every 12 hours. There we go. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and step off screen. Let's watch a time lapse of high tide coming up and low tide coming up. Oh, whoa, the water's filling up. Wow, friends, I am genuinely impressed. The water started all the way in the back. It went all the way up to the sand. That didn't go up to maybe like plants, right? Yeah. So what we're looking at right here is called an intertidal zone. We're seeing different zonations of different types of special habitats throughout a tide pool, right? So you can see that we have our beachy sandy areas, which would be wide open pools. We also have our rocky areas, and all the way in the back we have the rest of the ocean, right? So it kind of shows that there's different types of microhabitats throughout a tide pool, right? That is called zonation. So a high tide, like I said, will happen every 6 hours, and a low tide will happen every 2 hours. Every 6 hours. So that means we have 4 total tides a day in our 24-hour day. So that means we would have this come all the way up, all the way back, all the way up, all the way back. And it would kind of be a bit of a challenge. Do you like it when the weather changes a whole bunch in a day? I used to live in Florida instead of Long Beach. And Florida is a lot of weather, has a lot of weather. It changes all throughout the day. And that's one of the reasons, I decided, I want a bit better beach weather. I'm going to come move to California. And that's because the weather is constant, and we're used to it. It's really, really normal, right? Whereas in Florida, the rainstorms may come on random minute notice. So for these animals, their lives are a bit different. They adapt to have to this 6-hour cycle, right? Where we don't change in that way, right? Okay. Let's go ahead and start to explore how some of these animals might adapt to this unique schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and head over to our document camera. Okay, there we go. I think it's bright enough. Okay. So right here I have some really cool biofacts. Has anyone ever heard the word biofact before? Yeah. So a biofact is simply any natural object or artificial object to replicate nature, to be able to teach us about something about the natural world, right? So all of these are real artifacts from animals, and they're going to help us learn a little bit about this tide pool habitat. So what I want you to do, scientists, is I want you to use your comparing and your contrasting skills. How are some of these animals different, and how are some of these animals the same? And I think that will tell us a little bit more about how these animals live in this special place. Okay, friends, go ahead. Think about it. I want to take a nice long think for this one, okay? So I'm going to be quiet for just a little, and I'm going to let you think. Use your scientist skills. Think about noticing things and what questions you might have. And this is also a great time while we're thinking to go ahead and plug our phone line. So if you do have any questions or you want to share your really cool observations with us, you can go ahead and call at 562 286-1838. So again, scientists, go ahead. You can call us or email us. Be happy to answer your questions. Okay, scientists, good job. So I'm sure you all just made some really great observations or things that you notice or are asking some great questions. So let's go ahead and start to think about how are these animals similar. So first I'm going to kind of talk about like what animals are these. So this one right here is a sea star. I think that's our easiest one. What do you think this one could be? This one is a sea urchin. This one is a type of snail called a chestnut cowrie. This is the shell of a hermit crab. And this is a really special animal called a limpet. So, some of the things that I notice about all these animals is that they are all hard-shelled. And that's actually a really good adaptation to be able to help these animals survive in this habitat. Now, if you were one of these animals and you were really cozy in your little tide pool, why don't we go ahead and take a look at like kind of like a tide pool with a bunch of little tiny nooks and crevices. Go ahead and take a moment and look at this. There we go. Perfect. So we can kind of see how we have this really nice pool. I could see some good seaweed in there. That'd be a good place to hide, right? Or maybe some of the shallower areas where there's little tiny pools. You can maybe hide underneath a rock, right? So if you wanted to stay there, what challenges do you think you would have in staying there during that 6-hour time period? I think maybe we could even see some of these mussels right here dealing with that right now. Okay, yeah. So I think the biggest challenge that these marine animals have is trying to stay wet, right? So a lot of these animals, if we could go back over to our document camera, all have hard shells, and that kind of helps them keep some water in them. Now, not all these animals would want to stay out for 6 hours, right? That might be really, really extreme, right? But these animals are not going to have too much trouble, like if they need to go traverse over a rock, move over a rock to get to a different tide pool, right? They're able to hold a little bit of water inside, which is going to keep them going for a little bit, right? So having a hard shell like this is really useful in a tide pool. But what about animals that do not have a hard shell? Well, why don't we go ahead and look at some animals that do not have a hard shell? One of my favorites is actually the sea anemone. So let's take a look at a sea anemone. There we go. Perfect. So this was one of the animals I was talking about earlier. This is actually the type of animal that Nemo lives in. And wait, what? An animal? Yeah, that is actually an animal. It is a type of invertebrate. So an invertebrate is an animal that has no backbone or no bones, right? So they're really soft and squishy. And so is this one. If you come to the Aquarium of the Pacific, there we go. Perfect. We have the word invertebrate. So vertebrates are like us, animals that have bones, and in means it's not one. This animal has no bones. Yeah. So one of the special adaptations this animal has is that it is able to curl up into a ball. And that's actually how it eats, but that would be really helpful in a tide pool when the water goes down. Because do you think this animal can move? Let's think about it for a moment. It actually can. But it's not going to be able to move around very much. Yeah, exactly. It's going to want to stay planted like that. But if a sea anemone did need to move around, it could actually detach what's known as its foot. That's kind of the sticky part that holds onto the rock. It's able to kind of jump around and float in the water a little bit, but they're not going to do that very often. It's kind of risky, and they want to make sure they're in a good, solid place. So when we see these anemones wrapped up into a ball like this, that helps them retain water and stay wet. Yeah. So we can kind of see how a lot of animals have different strategies. We could also see that sea star we're seeing right there is also out of the water, right? So like you always want to keep a fish in the water, right? So it's really important that they stay wet. But the sea star, it has a little bit of time in between, and a lot of tide pool animals need that time in between. They'll get somewhere else, or they'll have extreme tactics to be able to survive long periods, right? Why don't we go ahead and go look back at that anemone picture again? There we go. What are some other cool things you notice about this animal, scientists? I notice some really cool tentacles. Yeah, so that animal has a bunch of tentacles instead of arms. Now imagine if my hands were on my chest. Do you think I'd be able to put food in my mouth very easily? No. But if I curled up like this, do you think I'd be able to eat? Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what the sea anemone does. It has special stinging cells that are able to grab onto its food, and then it's able to curl up into that shape that we saw earlier without the water over it, and it's able to curl up and put its food into its mouth from there. So yeah, it's kind of like a dual purpose adaptation. It helps it eat, and it also keeps it wet when it's inside of a tide pool. Okay, why don't we go ahead and start to look at some of our other cool animals? Actually, I think we could stay on this slide. What other animals do you notice, scientists? Ooh, I notice a whole bunch of sea stars. So I see some really cool sea stars on there. I see a leather star and some ochre stars and a couple of other really cool stars. Yeah. So, how fast do you think a sea star could move? Do you think it's sprinting a football field? No. No, that's definitely not sprinting a football field. But maybe it could crawl over a rock in maybe 30 minutes? I think it could do that, yeah. So if the tide is going down, do you think the sea star is going to want to stay out of the water for all 6 hours? No, I don't think so. So it's going to slowly move back towards the ocean as the tide's going back down. And then it'll move back up. And it's going to use these very special tube feet to be able to move around. So do you all see those little tiny, tiny tubes right there? Yeah, it's called its tube feet, and they're actually filled with water. Have you ever turned on a hose and saw the hose go and it gets water all over the place, maybe all over your dog or the lawn, right? Yeah, that is pretty much what that's doing. It's hydraulic pressure. It's causing the water inside of those tubes to be able to move around, control over it, unlike the hose I was talking about, right? They have a really cool, do you think you could get me a picture of a sea star from the top side? They have a really cool organ called a madreporite. So, do you all see a different colored dot on some of these? Let's see. I think I can see the madreporite on that one right there. Do you see that little white dot? So it's basically like a periscope that kind of pops up and allows the water to enter the sea star. So it holds the water inside and it's able to move around using the water pressure. It's a pretty cool animal. And it really helps when it's in a tide pool and the tide's going down. Helps it kind of move, right? Okay. Awesome. Now, why don't we go ahead and take a look at some more of our shelled animals? Can we take a look at a hermit crab? Do we have any hermit crabs? Let's see. If not, we can also go back over to the document camera too. Okay, let's head over to the document camera, everyone. Let's go. Okay, so as you can see, this is our hermit crab shell. So a hermit crab is simply just a little tiny crab that makes this shell its home, right? Is the crab already a hard-shelled animal? Yes, it is. That's right. So that little hard shell is already going to kind of be helpful, right? But do you think it'll kind of have a little excess water inside of the shell because it's not perfectly fitted in there, right? Yeah. So that shell is kind of going to help it hold on to a little bit of water as well. So again, it's not going to want to stay out of the water for that full 6 hours, but I think it'd do okay if the water was starting to go down. It'd get the idea and it'd try to go to a better place, right? Yeah. And while I'm still on the document camera, why don't we take a closer look at our sea stars as well? Let's see if we can't find the madreporite on this sea star. There we go. This one's a little hard to tell. I believe it's that little tiny center dot right there. There we go. Okay, let's also take a look at the bottom side too. Do you see these little straight lines right here? Those would be where the tube feet came out of. Yeah. All right, so how about we go over to a sea snail? Do we have any photos of sea snails by chance? Yes, please. All right. Wow, look at this animal right here, everyone. So this animal is called a chestnut cowrie. Do you see some different colors? I see some different colors, right? I see orange, yellow, white, green. I see a whole bunch of black dots. Do you see some black dots? Yeah. So what we're looking right here is a marine snail called a chestnut cowrie. So basically, we don't really think about it, but there are ocean snails, right? That's something I didn't always think about growing up. I'm like, I thought these snails were just here in my garden or maybe in the lake, right? But no, we do have ocean snails as well. And a lot of them live in tide pools. And they keep that hard shell to kind of keep their water inside, right? Or not really inside, but it kind of helps them stay moist. How it really takes the really cool special adaptations that this animal has is that it has a really smooth shell. As a matter of fact, friends, my favorite thing to touch at the entire aquarium of the Pacific is chestnut cowries because their shells are so dang soft. It almost feels like nail polish. But they're going to actually have a really cool special organ called a mantle that's going to actually help polish their shell. So does everyone see the little black dots right here and that little fleshy bit above the shell? It will actually completely close off the top of its shell with the mantle, and they'll go up and down like that, and it's kind of like polishing it. It'll keep it really, really smooth. They're not going to be like polishing like that, right? But just over time, them doing that every single day, that will actually help keep their shell smooth. That smooth shell is going to help them be able to move around really well. It won't get stuck on things, right? Or maybe if we see that crab shell back there, do you think that could get stuck in some kelp? I think so. It needs to be able to move through pretty quick. But I think this actually leads into our perfect next topic. What other animals do you see in this tide pool photo, friends? I think I see a sea urchin. That's right. Yeah. There we go. What a perfect photo of a sea urchin. Thank you, Lourdes. So, we have right here a sea urchin. It's an animal that has really good protective spines that are going to help protect it from predators, right? So it's going to be a hard animal, and those spines are going to kind of help it protect it. But do you think those spines could be used for anything else? Do you think that these animals are carnivores, or do you think they're herbivores? A carnivore is an animal that eats meat, and an herbivore is an animal that eats plants. I'll give you a little hint. It's sitting on its food. It eats kelp. Yeah, so that kelp is its primary food source, and it's actually going to use those little tiny spines to hold onto a piece of kelp. There we go. Perfect. So they're going to use these little spines to be able to hold on to kelp, and be able to kind of push it down to their bottom side because their mouth is actually on the bottom. They have a really cool special mouth called a lantern of Aristotle. And it's pretty much like 5 big spikes that kind of meet together in one point, and it helps kind of tear up the kelp. Yeah, it also has tube arms, just like the sea star, that's going to kind of help move and grab onto things and push it down towards the bottom side of its mouth. Now, if you've ever been to an aquarium before, you may have actually gotten to touch one of these really cool animals. We usually touch every animal in our aquarium with a special 2-finger touch, but with our sea urchins, we could do a special 1-finger touch. So as you can see right here, I'm going to give this animal a special 1-finger touch. There we go. You can put 1 finger in between the spines, and it will actually give, because it thinks you're a piece of kelp. And it uses those little tiny tube arms to give you a little taste. And it goes, "You're not kelp. I don't want you." Okay, yeah. So why don't we go and take a look at our sea star, or sorry, our sea anemone on the document camera. Okay. What are some things you notice, scientists? There we go. Now that's nice and focused. Let's see. So I notice a whole bunch of dots. And on the bottom side, there's a really big hole. So that big hole is actually where their mouth is. So that's why they're going to have all those little spines to kind of help pass it down, right? Yeah. Now I have one more animal I want to show you here on this document camera as we start to wrap up in these next few minutes. And this animal is called a limpet. Now you may have seen a limpet if you've gone to a tide pool in the past, but you may not have known it because it kind of just looks like a rock, right? But it's actually another type of snail. It has a little fleshy bit underneath here, and its idea is it wants to kind of stay in place. It doesn't want to move around too much. This is a really tiny little animal, so it's not going to zoom around the tide pool, right? So it's going to kind of hold down, and it's going to kind of keep that shell really close to the rock, and that's going to help try to keep the animal moist and survive those extreme tide pool habitats, right? Yeah, very good. Huh? Ooh, yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at a limpet as well. There we go, yeah. So that's a really interesting one right there. You can kind of see how it has a bunch of different colors. Maybe it has some solid camouflage that would help it be able to blend into its habitat, right? Do you think that kind of blends in with the rocks pretty well right there? Yeah, I'd say so. So that kind of helps it live in its home, right? So all these animals have very special adaptations that help them live in their home. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and just go back to our tide pool right here? Do you think you could see a lot more animals than you did before? Yeah, I think I could see some really cool ones like our sea anemones. And you can also see our sea anemones all wrapped up like this. You may not have noticed them before because, you thought it looked like a flower. But now we can see they kind of look in a whole bunch of different ways. I can see some clams up in there. I can see a sea star. I could see some different types of sea urchins. And also another cool animal that we didn't talk about up here. Sorry, pardon my wild hands. Is also a sea cucumber. Those are really cool animals. Maybe we'll learn more about them another time in another Aquarium Online Academy. But before we go, I also want to make sure we talk about some really cool ways you could go explore tide pools, because tide pools are a really great place to go explore the ocean. You don't need to go swim to explore the ocean. You can walk right up to it, right? And we have so many cool, amazing beaches around here in Southern California that have special places called a marine protected area that helps keep these environments really beautiful, right? So you always want to make sure you go when it's low tide. You could usually find online resources, such as like a tide tracker, to figure out what time of day the low tide is. It's always going to change throughout the month, right? Make sure you wear nice and grippy shoes because you don't want to slip. It's wet, it's slippery, and there's sharp rocks, right? So you want to make sure you're going with an adult. You have grippy shoes. It's always a good idea to bring a trash bag with you so you can collect any trash that you happen to find on the beach. And make sure, we want to explore. We want to make observations, right? But we don't want to take our animals home with us because This is their home. This is where they live. This is their special adaptations help them live here, right? They're not going to do well at home. So we want to make sure we keep any animals or any shells right there on the beach. All right, everyone, I hope you all had an amazing time learning with me today. We have our Aquarium Online Academy every Tuesday and Thursday, so make sure you come check us back out. If we have any teachers on this live stream with us, please go ahead and pop your class numbers just so we can keep a record of how many students are watching today. Alrighty, everyone. Feel free to text in any questions at any time to 562-286-1838 or email us at live@lbaop.org. I hope you had an amazing day and you learned plenty about the ocean. Alrighty, bye-bye, everyone.